I've got the pleasure to have on the other end of a Skype connection here, Kevin Clemens. Kevin is up in Elmo Lake, Minnesota, and Kevin is one of those really, frankly, remarkable people who really hang it out on the line and build machines to race across the salt flats at Bonneville. And he's taken up the challenge of doing electric motorcycles and came pretty doggone close to setting a new record. Certainly beat the old record, but unfortunately had another team of university students from Purdue that decided to go just a tad bit faster. So, Kevin, welcome to EV World.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. It's nice to be here.
It's great to have you with us. Of course, about a year ago, I was doing a similar interview with Ava Hawkinson, and you may know Ava.
I do.
She's the little Swedish lady that decided she was going to go out and break speed records as well in electric motorcycles. And of course, when you look at Ava's machine, you don't really see a motorcycle. What you see is a streamlined bullet with her strapped in it.
It's true.
But what you've been doing really looks like a real motorcycle. So I kind of like to talk to you about that. Well, first of all, let's kind of give us some background. When you're not out in your shop building motorcycles to race at Bonneville every year, what do you do for the rest of your time?
Well, I started out as an engineer. I actually worked for Michelin Tire for quite a few years back in the 80s. And I was in charge of racing tires and performance tires. And I got actually involved in Bonneville then because Mazda had wanted to go to the salt flats and set a record with a RX-7 turbo.
Okay.
They wanted to go over 200 miles an hour. And I helped them out with that.
All right.
And in the back of my mind, I've always felt like there was something there that was left undone, that I needed to go there with my own project. So,
Right.
so I'm an engineer by training, but I also worked as a technical editor at Automobile Magazine for a dozen years in the 90s.
Okay.
And then became a freelance writer. So I consider myself an automotive journalist and a writer, although I also have a degree in environmental education. So I guess I'm somewhat of an educator too.
Right. Very good. So you're a multitasking person who also, I gather, also knows how to weld, right?
I can weld, yeah. I'm not terrific at welding, but the more I do it, the better I get.
The better you get. Okay, great. So when did you start, personally begin, racing? And I assume you probably didn't start with electrics.
No, actually, I used to race vintage sports cars, and I raced in the SCCA for a little while. But in 2007, I wrote a book about alternative fuels and hybrid vehicles. It's called The Crooked Mile. And when I wrote that book, I said, I should really put my money where my mouth is. And since I did have an interest in Bonneville, I decided to look into doing electric motorcycles for Bonneville. And so the first year was 2011. We basically threw together a little bike out of a Honda Scrambler frame I had lying around my shop. My wife and I went to Bonneville, and it was very simple. It used AGM batteries. It used an E-Tech motor, very sort of off the shelf. We wanted to make everything as robust as we could because I knew how difficult it really was to set records at Bonneville. But we went there and we set a national record, and I thought that was going to be the end of it. But
yeah.
The salt gets in your blood, and I ended up having what we call salt fever. So Last year I went back with a bike based on a Kawasaki Ninja 250 with an Agni motor in it, a lot more sophisticated batteries, lithium polymer batteries, the kind they use for radio-controlled airplanes.
Right.
And we went there and managed to set 4 world records and 2 national records. And that was exciting to be able to do that, to set those records.
So how does one determine? When you say you're going to set a record, obviously now when I looked at what Ava had done, Ava had set I think this in August, like 28th, she did 212 miles an hour, plus a little bit. And of course your speeds were obviously less than that. So we're talking about different classes. So how does that work out? You're in a particular, I guess, weight class and style? Kind of explain that.
Yeah, it's a completely different class than what Ava runs in. There's actually 3 classes that both the International Organization and the AMA, the American Motorcycle Association, use for records for electric vehicles. There's a 150 kilogram class, which is the lightest. That's about 330 pounds. There's a 300 kilogram class, and then there's an unlimited class. And the unlimited bikes are going over 200 miles an hour. And Ava's bike is a sidecar bike, so in addition to having the 2 wheels in line, she has an extra wheel that helps balance the bike. there are different classes too within those weight classes, depending upon the amount of streamlining you have. You can be unstreamlined, you can be partially streamlined, you can be altered, partially streamlined, which allows a lot more, that sort of thing. So it's kind of a Byzantine system of classifications. But what I was interested in, you alluded to it earlier, that if you look at Eva's bike, it doesn't look like a motorcycle. And I was kind of interested in the future of urban transportation and the future of transportation in general. And I see that as being more along the lines of a motorcycle that looks like a motorcycle, something you can sit on, something that you can ride. And so that was my interest. And I looked at the classes and I said, well, I can't really compete against the 200-mile-per-hour bikes just working out of my little home workshop. But the 150-kilogram records were all in the 50, 60, 70-mile-an-hour range. And I thought I could probably go after those.
Yeah.
And so what I decided to do, and there's a significant technical challenge there, trying to build a motorcycle that'll go fast, but that only weighs 330 pounds with batteries and motors and that sort of thing. It's an interesting engineering challenge, so I've kind of enjoyed that aspect of it.
Okay, so you began this particular, you actually raced, you've got these two bikes, as I understand it. You've got one that looks just kind of like a real motorcycle, except obviously got a lot of fairings and streamlining on it. And then you've got the other one, which is a motorcycle that, kind of like Ava, you put a sidecar on, but when I think of a sidecar, I think of something like Indiana Jones, right? Where Sean Connery, his quote father unquote, is sitting in that sidecar and jousting. That's a sidecar. But what Ava had done, it looks like it's an outrigger kind of a thing. So,
well, for this year, so we set our world records last year, and for this year we decided to go back with a much more streamlined solo motorcycle using the Kawasaki Ninja as a basis. And a friend of mine in Siren, Wisconsin, named Tom Anderson, he's also known as Santa Claus because he's got a long white beard. Okay. He's been going to Bonneville for 30 years or more. And he built me a new fairing over the winter, which was based on a Bob George design from the early 1970s that had gone well over 200 miles an hour with a Harley-Davidson motor. So he knew it was slippery.
Right.
He built me this new fairing, and putting a new fairing on the bike meant that the batteries didn't fit anymore, so I had to put them on the box on the back, and I decided to play around with the aerodynamics of that and do some work with carbon fiber. And so the bike is kind of strange looking. We call it the fabulous photon torpedo because one of the other projects we did this year was to work with 10K Solar, a manufacturer of solar panels here in Minnesota, to recharge the bike using solar energy instead of using gasoline generators. I got tired of listening to all those gasoline generators on the cell flat. So that was one of the other things, and the photon torpedo sort of fit in with that. So that was our primary bike. That was the one we were spending most of our time on. Well, over the winter, I kind of thought about that little Honda Scrambler I had that had set a record back in 2011. We actually used that as our pit bike last year, so it was the only national land speed record-setting pit bike I think that's ever existed. But and so I took it all apart and I built, using my welding skills you alluded to earlier, I put together a little sidecar frame for it. And sidecars, as you say, in land speed records, are not those big tubs that you sit in like Sean Connery did. They're actually, they have a very specific purpose, and they're very clearly defined by the rules. They have to carry 132 pounds of ballast, or a rider. In this case, I carried the ballast. They have a very specific size, everything else. But so I made that my little bike together with that, and originally intended it to run in the 150-kilogram class, but it was a few pounds overweight, and rather than fight with it, we just threw it up to the 300-kilogram class. The record there was only 50 miles an hour. Frankly, we only finished the bike just the Monday before we left on Wednesday, so we threw it on the trailer and hadn't
sounds familiar. I hear that story quite often.
Like that, So we brought it along with us, and we put our major effort into the photon torpedo bike, but we just couldn't catch the Purdue University team that was running a much more powerful prototype motor than we were, and frankly much better batteries. It kind of shows you how technology is progressing. But we did drag the little sidecar bike out and finally enter it, and it set a record. It went 54.5 miles an hour, which was slightly better than the 50-mile-an-hour speed. But frankly, and I hate to admit this, it was almost more fun to ride the little sidecar bike at 55 miles an hour than it was the photon torpedo at 99 miles an hour. Okay. So there you go.
Yeah, so take us to Bonneville.
Okay.
What sort of is the procedure there? As I understand, some of the people I've talked to that have raced at Bonneville, basically you run a set mile course or whatever it is and go down, you turn around and you come back, and you have to do that like within an hour's time or something like that.
Right. We run what's called the Bonneville Bub Speed Trials event. It runs at the week after the usual speed weeks, and it's only for motorcycles.
Okay.
The interesting thing, there'll be 350 or 450 motorcyclists there, all trying to set records with their bikes. And there's everything from old Harley Davidsons to old Triumphs to brand new BMWs to, absolutely the gamut of motorcycles. And what we found running our electric bikes is it's really interesting because even those hardcore biker guys love to come up and talk about the new technology we're playing with. And especially this year with the big solar panels up, it was really an attraction. People wanted to come up and talk about what we were doing that was so different from other things. But so you go to Bonneville and you have the tech inspection and everything else. And there's two courses that are available. One is a 5-mile course for slower bikes like mine, and the other is a 10-mile course for really fast bikes like Eva's. And so we run the 5-mile course, but because we're running an electric and because we have so much torque, we don't really need to start at the 0-mile mark. We actually start at the 1-mile mark. So we have a mile to get up to speed. We have a mile that we're timed, and then we have another mile to slow down. And if you break the record in that mile in which you're timed, then within a certain amount of time, and it depends if you're running the world record, it's 2 hours, or if you're running the national record, you have several hours, you have to make a return run on the same course. And they take the average of those 2 runs, and that's your speed. And if you break the record, then you have a new record. And so unfortunately, my photon torpedo bike didn't break it broke the existing record, which was 68 miles an hour.
Right.
But it just couldn't catch
up with the Purdue kids, huh?
Yeah, the Purdue kids, yeah, they were running. I think that's terrific, frankly. I mean, as much as I'd like to beat them, and I would, they beat me fair and square, and frankly, that's one of the reasons I'm doing this, to get people out there and understand the need for electric vehicles.
Right, that's very cool. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the solar part of this thing. Now, I would assume that this probably takes several hours, or, I mean, how long do it typically take with your panel setup? Talk a little bit about that.
Well, we used 2 commercial solar panels from 10K Solar. They were 190 watts each. And so if you figure 190 watts double is about 400 watts.
Right.
And if you have that out on the salt flats for 8 hours, you get enough energy if you can store that. So what we did, we put this together fairly quickly. So what we did was use 4 large lead acid storage batteries, deep cycle storage batteries. So we stored the energy from the sun, and then we used our digital chargers to charge our lithium polymer batteries. So we hooked those up there. So we figured the amount of energy coming from the sun was enough, but we use about 1,500 1,500 watt hours to make a run. And so we figured during the day we were putting enough into the batteries to recharge our batteries twice. And that worked out pretty well because we could do that. It takes about an hour and a half to recharge the lithium polymer batteries using the charging system I'm using.
Okay.
So, but the problem is by the time you stand in line, you make a run, you stand in line again to make your return run. By the time you're done, it's really hard to make more than 1 run in a day. I mean, you're really hard pressed to do that with an electric bike. Gasoline bikes, you can refill your gasoline and go right back out again.
Go back at it again. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. So we have a little disadvantage there. We have to plan our logistics a lot more carefully during the day how we're going to run.
Right.
But the solar panels work great. I mean, frankly, for having put that program together in just a couple of weeks, everything worked perfectly. And our pits were absolutely silent. I mean, everybody else had their generators running. People would walk by and say, "We can talk here. This is wonderful."
Talk here, yeah. Now, of course, obviously, you don't have the vapors and the pollution you have to deal with.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, great. Okay, so what they whooped you good, fair and square this year. What's your plans for next year? Are you going to go back? Are you going to take them on? What?
Well, it's kind of interesting because I look at my photon bike, my photon torpedo bike, and I say, it's probably reached the limit of what I can do with a standard existing frame. If I want to stay in 150 kilogram class, it's probably reached the limit of what I can do with a standard existing motorcycle, modifying it for speed. Because at some point with 150 kilograms to play with, you need to add more batteries and you need to add more motor to go faster.
Yeah.
And you start running into the fact you've got steel frame and all that other stuff that's from a normal motorcycle. So I'm kind of toying with the idea of looking at a composite frame or a monocoque maybe made out of carbon fiber. But once you start thinking about those things, you say, well, maybe we need to go to the next generation of motorcycle. Maybe we need to think about a recumbent motorcycle that gets the rider very low and out of the airstream so that we get much better aero. So there's a lot of ways of looking at this. And frankly, I think if you want to look at the future of the motorcycle, you probably shouldn't look in motorcycle shops today as in showrooms. You should probably be looking at someplace like Bonneville, because there's a lot of innovation going on with respect to aerodynamics, and I think that's the next big step. On the other hand, I really enjoy the sidecar bikes. First of all, when you get off them, they don't fall over. Big advantage.
Right.
But so I'm thinking I might be looking at ing pushing the sidecar technology a little bit more. In a way, it's a bit of a dead end because nobody's really looking at sidecar bikes for the future, but they might be looking at three-wheelers or something like that. So there's some technology overlap. So I haven't put my plans together yet, but I'm definitely looking at.
Or you could take the approach of lit motors and put a bunch of gyroscopes low on the bike, and
yeah, you can do that and keep everything standing by itself. There's so much opportunity for innovation at this kind of thing, and the records are still. I think the little sidecar bike I rode at 54 miles an hour. I'm going to predict right now that that's the last record that's ever going to be set using AGM batteries and an old E-Tech motor, and it's just the technology is pushed so far beyond that right now. That, I got lucky that there was an open record at that low of a speed, but I think the next 300 kilogram electric sidecar motorcycle is going to go well over 150. I just hope it's mine.
Right. Okay, so you're planning on going back then?
No, I can't get away. It's salt fever. It's the keeps in your blood.
Now, you're doing all this riding yourself. You're not hiring some young stud to climb on board?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, I'm not small. I have very wide shoulders, and I'm a fairly big guy. Weight doesn't matter that much at Bonneville. Actually, weight can help you to get some better traction, but it's the aerodynamics that make a difference. And when you're as wide in the shoulders as I am, you make a big hole in the air. And so eventually I'm going to get the point. Either I'm going to have to build a bike that the aerodynamics are so good that it doesn't matter how big I am, or I'm going to have to find some small person to ride it. It's one or the other.
Right. Very good. Well, look, Kevin, thank you so much for talking about it, and we wish you the best of luck next year.
Well, thank you. It's been my pleasure.
Okay. All right. Bye-bye. And we're done. Excellent. Thank you.
Okay. Did that work for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that'll be great.
Okay. Do you need any photographs or anything? I think I sent you some.
If you've got some more in addition, that would be helpful, I think.
Yeah, I could send you some more detailed shots of the sidecar bike and the solar stuff if you want, or whatever.
No, please do.
Okay, and you just want me to send those via email? They won't have any. You won't have any problem getting them.
Yep, that's fine. Yep.
Sounds great. I love your work. I mean, I do read it constantly, and pay a lot of attention to it. So it's I'm glad you're doing what you're doing.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, sure. Okay, this has been fun. Thanks.
All right, talk to you later.
Okay, bye bye.
Bye bye.